At 11:45 on a freezing Tuesday night, Thomas Miller pushed open the one door every janitor in Apex Holdings had been warned never to touch, and in the next 3 seconds, his entire life began to collapse. He was supposed to be invisible, just another tired man in a blue uniform dragging a trash bag through marble hallways while billionaires slept in penthouses and men like him counted coins for rent. He had a 7-year-old daughter waiting at home with weak lungs, an overdue clinic bill, and an empty refrigerator that made him feel like a failure every time he opened it. All he wanted was to empty one office bin, catch the last bus, and survive another day. But behind that half-open mahogany door stood Evelyn Croft, the most feared CEO in the city, the woman who could destroy companies with a signature and fire thousands without blinking. Except she was not behind her desk. She was not powerful. She was standing half-dressed beneath a single brass lamp, bruised, trembling, trapped inside a brutal medical brace she could not remove. For one breathless moment, the billionaire queen and the broke single father stared at each other like two people caught committing different crimes. Thomas saw the secret that could end her empire. Evelyn saw the desperation of a man who could not afford to lose anything. He thought she would call security. He thought his badge would be dead by morning. He thought he had just doomed his daughter's future. But what Thomas did not know was that Evelyn Croft did not need a witness silenced. She needed a shadow, and by sunrise, the janitor she should have destroyed would become the only man standing between her, her enemies, and the fall of a billion-dollar throne. The elevator doors had opened on the 50th floor with a whisper, but to Thomas Miller, it sounded like the beginning of a sentence he would never survive. Everything about that floor was too quiet, too expensive, too clean. Down below where the night crew worked, the building groaned and buzzed like a tired machine. There were humming fluorescent lights, rolling trash bins, stained break-room carpets, coffee rings dried into conference tables, and the sour smell of bleach clinging to the air. But up here, sound disappeared into charcoal carpet so thick his worn boots barely made a noise. The walls were paneled in dark mahogany, the kind of wood Thomas had only seen in hotel lobbies and funeral homes. The lights glowed soft and golden instead of white and unforgiving. Even the air felt richer, scented faintly with leather, cold glass, expensive perfume, and something sharp like cedar. Thomas stood there for half a second with the black trash bag hanging from one hand and his microfiber cloth twisted in the other, wishing he had ignored Greg, wishing he had clocked out, wishing he had gone home to Sarah, instead of stepping into a place where men like him were not supposed to exist. His lower back ached from 7 hours of bending, lifting, and pushing the mop bucket over polished stone. His right knee pulsed with that old military pain, the deep grinding throb that came whenever rain moved through the city. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline blurred behind freezing sleet towers of light floating in the black like another world. Thomas did not belong in that world. He belonged in a one-bedroom apartment with a radiator that clanked all night, a fridge that hummed louder than it cooled, and a little girl who slept with her rescue inhaler under her pillow because she was afraid she would stop breathing before he got home. Sarah. The thought hit him with the weight of a hand around his throat. 7 years old, too small for her age, with dark curls, bright eyes, and lungs that betrayed her whenever winter settled into the walls. He had promised her pancakes on Sunday if he could pick up enough overtime. He had promised her the good inhaler when he got paid. He had promised her things every father should be able to promise without doing math in his head until he felt sick. Rent was due in 4 days. The landlord had already left one warning note taped to the door. Mrs. Gable downstairs had been kind about watching Sarah during Thomas's night shifts, but kindness still cost money, and Thomas was running out of everything except shame. That was why he moved forward instead of turning back. That was why he entered the boardroom first, quickly, quietly, with the nervous efficiency of a man who knew that one complaint from the wrong person could erase his paycheck. The boardroom was massive, long, and cold, with a glass table that reflected the city lights like black water. There were 3 crumpled coffee cups, 2 half-empty bottles of sparkling water, a napkin stained with lipstick, and a pile of shredded paper beside the recycling bin. Thomas worked fast. He emptied the bins, wiped a ring of condensation from the table, straightened one chair that had been pushed out too far, and kept his eyes away from the whiteboard even though it had already been wiped clean. He had learned long ago that invisible men survived by not being curious. Do not read the papers. Do not stare at the screens. Do not listen when executives argued behind glass walls. Do the job, lower your head, get out. By the time he tied off the trash bag, his cheap watch read 11:45 p.m. If he moved quickly, he could make the 12:10 bus. If the bus was late, he could still be at Mrs. Gable's before 1. If Sarah was asleep, he could carry her upstairs without waking her, tuck her into bed, sit beside her for 5 minutes, and pretend he was not terrified of the life he had built for her. He stepped back into the corridor and saw the final door at the end of the hall. Evelyn Croft, Chief Executive Officer. The brass nameplate caught the warm ceiling light and threw it back like a warning. Thomas stopped. Every janitor knew that name. Every security guard knew that name. Every trembling junior analyst who ran through the lobby clutching folders knew that name. Evelyn Croft was not just the CEO of Apex Holdings. She was the woman newspapers called ruthless, criminal, surgical. She bought companies the way other people bought coffee, stripped them down, rebuilt them, sold them, merged them, or buried them. Thomas had seen her once from across the lobby months earlier. She had moved through the revolving doors, surrounded by men in tailored suits, her heels striking the granite like gunshots, her expression so controlled it barely seemed human. She had passed within 10 feet of Thomas while he was changing a trash liner, and she had not looked at him. Not cruelly, not dismissively, not at all. To her, he had been part of the building, like the marble, the metal detector, the potted trees no one watered properly. And Thomas had been grateful for that. Being unnoticed was humiliating, but it was safe. Now her door was not fully closed. A thin blade of amber light cut across the carpet. Thomas stared at it, feeling his pulse crawl up into his throat. Greg's words came back to him. Top floor needs a sweep. Empty the bins. Don't touch the desk in the main office. Get out! The problem was simple and impossible. If he left the CEO's bin full and Greg checked, he could lose overtime or worse. If he entered and something went wrong, he could lose the job entirely. He stood there for 5 seconds, then 10. The building seemed to hold its breath with him. Maybe the light had been left on by an assistant. Maybe the office was empty. Maybe the door had not latched because some millionaire in a hurry had been too important to pull it shut. Thomas swallowed, adjusted his grip on the trash bag, and stepped forward. His rough fingers closed around the cool brass handle. Just the bin, he whispered to himself. In and out. He pushed the door open. The room beyond was larger than his entire apartment. A wall of glass looked out over the city. A massive desk stood near the windows, clean and sharp as an altar. There were shelves of awards, framed magazine covers, abstract paintings that probably cost more than his yearly income, and a Persian rug so beautiful Thomas was afraid to put his boots on it. At first he looked down, searching for the wastebasket, doing what he always did, making himself small. He saw black stilettos lying crooked on the rug. He saw a tailored jacket thrown across the back of a leather chair. He saw a dark silk blouse hanging loose over pale skin. Then a woman's voice cut through the room, low, tired and edged with irritation. "I told you to leave it at the desk, Marcus." Thomas froze so completely that even the plastic trash bag stopped rustling. His heart struck his ribs once, hard enough to steal the air from his lungs. Slowly, horribly, he looked up. Evelyn Croft stood 10 feet away beneath a brass desk lamp, but she was not the woman from the lobby, not the untouchable figure in the headlines, not the billionaire executioner with cold eyes and perfect posture. Her hair had come loose from its severe knot. Her face was pale beneath flawless makeup, her mouth tight with pain. Her blouse was partly unbuttoned, slipping off one shoulder. But Thomas barely registered it because wrapped around her torso was a rigid medical brace made of black canvas metal rods and heavy clasps. It gripped her ribs and spine like a cage. Her hands were twisted behind her back, fingers straining to release a mechanism she could not reach. Along her side, beneath the edge of the brace, bruises spread across her skin in ugly blooms of purple, yellow, and blue. They were not small bruises. They were the kind left by impact, by trauma, by something violent enough to break a body that money could not protect. Thomas's mind emptied. Every survival instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. Evelyn turned her head, annoyed by his silence, and when she saw him, the room changed. She did not scream. She did not cover herself. She did not gasp like a frightened woman in a melodrama. Her hands simply dropped to her sides. Her eyes sharpened bloodshot at the corners and fixed on him with a coldness that made him feel smaller than he had ever felt in his life. For 3 endless seconds, neither of them spoke. Thomas could hear the faint hum of the air system, the distant hiss of sleet against the windows, the blood rushing in his ears. Evelyn looked at his uniform, then his face, then the trash bag trembling in his hand. "You aren't Marcus," she said. It was not a question. Thomas's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His throat felt packed with dust. "I'm sorry," he finally choked. "I didn't know anyone was here. The manager told me to empty the bins. I wasn't trying to... Get out." Her voice was quiet, but it landed harder than a shout. Thomas stepped back too fast. His heel caught the edge of the rug and he stumbled, nearly falling, one hand flying out for balance. Panic ripped through him so violently his vision blurred. He saw rent notices, Sarah's inhaler, Mrs. Gable's tired kindness, the green light of his badge turning red forever. "Ma'am, please. I swear I didn't see anything. I won't say anything. I just need this job. I have a daughter and I said get out." This time her voice dropped lower, colder, final. Thomas fled. He yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway, pulling it shut behind him with a heavy click that sounded like a verdict. For a moment he stood with his back against the wall, breathing like he had run a mile. His hands were shaking so badly the cloth slipped from his fingers onto the carpet. "Stupid," he whispered, pressing both palms against his eyes. Stupid, stupid, stupid. He had seen the one thing a woman like Evelyn Croft would burn the world to hide. And men like Thomas did not survive knowing secrets that belonged to people with private elevators, personal lawyers, and enough money to erase a man before breakfast. Thomas waited in the corridor for the sound that would end him. A phone being lifted, a security alert whispering through the building, heavy footsteps coming from the elevator. His name spoken into a radio by some bored guard who would not care that the man he was escorting out had a child with weak lungs and no money for medicine. But nothing happened. The 50th floor remained silent, luxurious, and indifferent. Behind the closed door, Evelyn Croft made no sound at all. That somehow frightened him more. If she had screamed, if she had cursed, if she had called him a creep or thrown something at him, he could have understood that. Anger was human. Silence was strategy. Silence meant she was thinking. And Thomas knew enough about powerful people to know that when they thought too long about people like him, nothing good followed. He bent down with stiff fingers, picked up the fallen cloth, and backed away from the office as if the mahogany door might open again and swallow him whole. Every instinct told him to run, but he forced himself not to. Running would look guilty. Running would make the cameras remember him. So he walked one foot in front of the other down the velvet-soft corridor, past the boardroom, past the empty assistant's desk, toward the service elevator that now seemed miles away. The trash bag bumped against his leg. His heart beat so hard he could feel it in his bad knee. When the elevator finally opened, he stepped inside and pressed the basement button with a thumb that left a damp print on the metal. As the doors slid shut, he caught one last glimpse of the quiet executive floor, the amber light under Evelyn's door, the brass nameplate glowing like a threat. Then the elevator dropped. Thomas leaned back against the wall and squeezed his eyes shut. He had been in dangerous situations before, in the army. Before the injury, he had known what it meant for the body to flood with terror and still obey. He had known the sharp metallic taste of fear, but this was different. There, danger had rules. Here, danger wore silk-owned lawyers and signed paychecks. By the time he reached the basement, the sweat had gone cold under his uniform. The locker room smelled of damp socks, bleach, and old coffee. A radio played quietly from somewhere near the supply cage. Greg was not there. No one was there. Thomas should have felt relieved, but the emptiness only made it feel like the building had already decided to erase him. He untied the trash bag, threw it into the industrial bin, washed his hands twice, and stared at himself in the cracked mirror above the sink. He looked older than 34. The fluorescent lights carved shadows under his eyes. A line of gray had started at his temple, one he had not noticed before. "You idiot," he whispered. "You absolute idiot." He imagined Sarah asking why he was home early, why he looked scared, why he could not buy the inhaler anymore. He imagined telling her they might have to move again. He imagined the way she would try to be brave because she always tried to be brave for him, and that thought hurt worse than losing the job. He clocked out with his stomach clenched, expecting the machine to reject his ID, but it printed the time without hesitation. 12:03 a.m. He had 7 minutes to catch the bus. Outside, the sleet had thickened into freezing rain, falling sideways between the towers and splattering against the sidewalk in shining needles. Thomas pulled his thin jacket tight and started walking fast, though every step sent pain up through his knee. The city at midnight did not care about broken men. Delivery trucks hissed past. A drunk couple laughed under a hotel awning. Steam rose from a manhole in ghostly clouds. Thomas reached the bus stop with 30 seconds to spare and climbed aboard, feeding the fare box with coins he had counted that morning beside Sarah's cereal bowl. The bus was nearly empty. An old woman slept with her cheek against a grocery bag. A teenager in a hoodie stared at his phone. Thomas sank into a plastic seat near the back and pressed his forehead against the cold window. The glass trembled with the engine. Lights smeared across it in long orange and white lines like the whole city was melting. He kept seeing Evelyn's eyes. Not her body, not the expensive office, not even the bruises, though those came back too in flashes of purple and yellow under the harsh lamp. It was her eyes that stayed with him, the way they had gone from irritation to calculation in less than a second, the way she had looked at him as if measuring the cost of his existence. He told himself it was over, a terrible accident. Maybe she would decide he was too insignificant to bother with. Maybe she would let it go because firing him would draw more attention than ignoring him. But the hope died as soon as it formed. People like Evelyn Croft did not survive in shark tanks by letting threats drift away. He was not a threat because he wanted to be. He was a threat because he had eyes. That was enough. When he finally reached Mrs. Gable's building, his socks were wet, and his knee had stiffened almost completely. The old woman opened the door before he knocked, wrapped in a faded pink robe, her silver hair pinned in rollers. She coughed twice around 10, Mrs. Gable whispered, stepping aside, but she settled. "I gave her the water like you said." Thomas nodded, throat tight. "Thank you. I'll bring the money Friday." Mrs. Gable's face softened in that way he hated, that pitying softness that made him feel like a boy standing in front of a principal. "Thomas, honey, if you're short this week Friday," he said too quickly, then lowered his voice. "Please, I'll have it Friday." She let it go. He found Sarah curled on the couch beneath a fleece blanket printed with faded stars. Her crayon drawing lay on the floor beside her, a tall blue stick figure holding hands with a smaller green one under a crooked yellow sun. Thomas stood there for a moment watching her breathe. In, out. A slight whistle at the end. Not bad enough for the emergency room, not good enough for peace. He crouched, slid one arm beneath her knees and another behind her back, and lifted her carefully. She stirred, cheek pressing against his shoulder. "Daddy," she murmured. "I'm here, Bug. Did you fight the monsters at work?" Thomas closed his eyes for half a second. Yeah, he whispered. Something like that. Upstairs, he laid her in bed, placed the inhaler on the nightstand within reach, and sat on the edge of the mattress until her breathing steadied. Only then did he take off his wet boots and collapse onto the sofa without turning on the light. Sleep did not come. Every noise in the building became security knocking. Every vibration of his phone became a termination message. He watched the gray light of morning seep through the blinds, slept maybe 40 minutes, then woke with his hand clenched around nothing. The next day passed like a sentence being read slowly by a judge. Sarah ate generic cornflakes at the kitchen table, swinging her small legs, studying him with the solemn intensity only children have when adults lie badly. "Daddy, you look sick." "Just tired. You always say that." He tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "Because I'm always tired." She considered that, then pushed her last spoonful of cereal toward him. "You can have mine." The offer nearly undid him. He kissed the top of her head and told her to finish eating. After he dropped her at school, he walked home through wet streets and called 3 cleaning companies from a list taped to the fridge, pretending he was just being prepared. One number was disconnected. One was not hiring. One told him to apply online, which meant no. By afternoon, he had a headache behind his eyes and a knot in his stomach so hard he could barely swallow. At 9:15 p.m., he dressed for work because not going would be worse. If they were going to fire him, he would make them do it to his face. He put on the blue uniform, laced his heavy boots, and checked Sarah's inhaler twice before leaving her with Mrs. Gable. The Apex Holdings tower rose out of the rainy darkness like a blade. Thomas stood outside the revolving doors for a long moment, collar up, jaw tight. People in coats rushed past him without looking. He almost envied them. Then he stepped inside. The lobby was all polished stone and reflected light too bright, too open. The security guard at the desk glanced up, bored. Thomas walked toward the employee turnstile with his badge already in his hand. This was it. The little black reader waited. He pressed the card against it. For half a second, nothing happened. His chest seized. Then the machine beeped, and the light flashed green. The metal bar unlocked. Thomas stared at it. Green. Still green. He pushed through slowly, feeling no relief at all. A green light did not mean safety. It meant the trap was still open. In the basement, Greg stood near the punch clock with his clipboard hugged to his chest, looking sweatier than usual. His eyes flicked to Thomas, then away. Miller. Thomas stopped. "Greg, about last night. Leave the cart." Thomas went still. "What?" Greg swallowed his throat, bobbing. "You're not on floors tonight." The room seemed to tilt. "Am I fired?" "I don't know what you are." Greg lowered his voice, angry because he was scared, and scared because someone above him had made him feel small. "Mister." Hayes calls. "Said you're to go straight to 50. Don't clock in. Don't talk to anyone. Just go." Thomas felt all the blood drain from his face. The 50th floor. Evelyn Croft was not ignoring him. She was summoning him. Greg looked at him now with suspicion. Maybe envy. Maybe relief that whatever was happening was not happening to him. "What did you do, Tommy?" Thomas could have told him the truth. He could have said he had opened the wrong door and seen the Queen bleeding under her armor. Instead, he looked toward the service elevator and said, "I don't know yet." The ride up lasted 42 seconds. Thomas counted every one. At 20, his knee began to bounce. At 31, he forced it still. At 42, the doors opened onto the charcoal carpet and warm, soundless light. A man in a perfectly tailored gray suit waited in the vestibule, hands folded, expression carved from ice. Thomas knew him from a distance. Marcus Hayes, Evelyn's personal assistant, the man who moved behind her like a shadow with a calendar and a knife. Thomas Miller Hayes said, "Follow me." No greeting, no explanation. Thomas followed. They walked past the boardroom, past the assistant's station to the same mahogany door. Evelyn Croft's name shone under the light. Hayes opened it and stepped aside. Inside. Thomas crossed the threshold with the strange, sick feeling of a man walking voluntarily into a cage. This time, Evelyn was behind her desk, fully dressed, untouchable again. Black blazer, white silk blouse, hair pulled tight, makeup perfect enough to hide anything except the faint bluish exhaustion beneath her eyes. The office looked immaculate, as though last night had never happened. She did not look up from the tablet in her hand. Hayes closed the door behind Thomas, and the click echoed through the room. Thomas stood on the Persian rug, hands at his sides, heart hammering. He could not stand the silence. "I'm sorry," he blurted. "I know I wasn't supposed to go in there. I didn't know you were inside. I swear I haven't said anything to anyone. I won't. I just need this job, ma'am. My daughter—" "Sit down," Evelyn said. Thomas stopped talking. The two white leather chairs in front of her desk looked too clean for him. He sat on the very edge of one, afraid to lean back, aware of the bleach in his sleeves, the scuffs on his boots, the poverty he seemed to carry like a smell. Evelyn finally lifted her eyes. They were calm now. "That was worse. You didn't go to the press." Thomas blinked. "No, you didn't tell your manager. No, you didn't tell security. No." She studied him. Why? The question was so absurd, so cleanly delivered from the far side of a desk worth more than his car, that something bitter broke loose in him. "Because I scrub toilets for $15 an hour," he said, voice rough. "Because rent is due in 4 days. Because my kid needs medication I can barely afford. Because if I talk about the CEO, I don't become a hero. I become unemployed. I can't afford your secrets." The words hung there raw and ugly. For a moment, Evelyn did not move. Then she reached into a drawer, pulled out a manila folder, and slid it across the glass toward him. Thomas Miller, 34. Former infantry medical discharge after a training injury. Single father. One daughter, Sarah Miller, 7 years old. Outstanding clinic debt. Low credit score. No criminal record. No living spouse. No safety net. Thomas stared at the folder, then at her. Humiliation burned up his neck, turning quickly into anger. "You ran my life like a credit check. I ran your risk profile. That's my daughter in there." "Yes," Evelyn said, "that is why you are here." The anger faltered, confused by the sudden weight in her voice. Evelyn leaned back, but the movement was careful, controlled, and Thomas saw the flicker of pain she failed to hide. 4 months ago, I was in a helicopter crash in the Cascades. The public was told I was on a retreat in Kyoto. The board was told I had a minor accident. The truth is, I fractured 3 vertebrae, shattered 4 ribs, and I am currently held together by canvas metal narcotics and lies. Thomas went cold. "Why are you telling me this?" Evelyn's gaze did not waver. "Because if that truth becomes public before the logistics merger closes, I lose my company by Friday. And because last night, you saw enough to destroy me, but not enough to understand what you saw." She tapped one finger on the desk. "So now you will understand exactly what your silence is worth." Thomas looked at the folder on the desk, then at the woman behind it, and for the first time since he had walked into that office, he realized Evelyn Croft was not threatening him because she was powerful. She was threatening him because she was cornered. There was a difference, and the difference made the room feel even more dangerous. Powerful people could ignore men like him. Cornered people could do anything. Evelyn's face remained carved into that perfect corporate mask. But now Thomas noticed the tiny betrayals beneath it. The faint tremor in her left hand before she folded it over the other. The unnatural stiffness in her spine. The way she breathed shallowly through her nose, as if every full breath had a price. "Your silence," she continued, "is worth more than your current annual income. It is worth more than whatever loyalty your manager thinks he owns. It is worth more than your pride." Thomas gave a humorless laugh, though his throat felt tight. "You think I have pride left?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. "Everyone has pride, Mr. Miller. Poverty just forces people to sell it in smaller pieces." The word struck too close, and Thomas hated her for it. He hated the glass desk between them, hated the clean white chair beneath him, hated that she could speak about his life like a market condition. "So what is this?" he asked, nodding toward the folder. "Blackmail. An offer. You had your assistant dig through my daughter's medical bills because I needed to know what would make you say yes. The honesty was so cold it almost stole his breath. Thomas stood up the chair, shifting behind him with a soft scrape. No. Evelyn did not move. You haven't heard the terms. I heard enough. He pointed at the folder. That is my life. That is my kid. You don't get to spread it open on a desk like one of your failing companies and decide what pieces are useful. For one brief second, something moved across Evelyn's face, something almost like regret, but it was gone before Thomas could name it. Sit down. I'm not one of your employees right now. Actually, you are. But that is not why you will sit. Her voice lowered, not louder, but heavier. You will sit because if you walk out that door with no arrangement between us, then you become an uncontrolled variable, and I cannot afford uncontrolled variables. Thomas froze. It was not the words themselves. It was the calm way she said them, like a doctor explaining a terminal diagnosis. Are you threatening me? I am explaining the world you accidentally entered. I entered an office to empty a trash can and saw the one thing that could trigger a board coup, collapse a merger, and hand control of my company to men who have been waiting 10 years to gut it. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, then stopped as pain flickered along her jaw. I am not asking you to like me. I am asking whether you love your daughter enough to make a practical decision. Thomas's anger flared so suddenly his hands shook. Don't you say that to me! Why? Because it's ugly. Her eyes sharpened. Your landlord does not care if love is ugly. The pharmacy does not care. The clinic does not care. The bus driver does not care. Love in your world requires cash. I am offering cash. The cruelty of it should have made him walk out. Instead, it pinned him in place because every word was true. He thought of Sarah pushing her cereal bowl toward him that morning. He thought of the wheeze at the end of her breath. He thought of standing at a pharmacy counter while the clerk told him the insurance would not cover the better inhaler and feeling something inside him collapse because a price tag had become a wall between his child and air. Slowly hating himself, Thomas sat back down. Evelyn opened another drawer and removed a single sheet of paper, then placed it on top of the folder. $3,000 a week, cash bonus structure through a private consultancy. Full corporate medical coverage for you and your daughter effective immediately. A housing stipend if needed. Your previous position remains available on paper, but your new assignment will be executive logistics support. Thomas stared at her. For a moment, he could not translate the numbers into reality. $3,000 a week was not a raise. It was oxygen. It was rent paid early. It was groceries without counting coins. It was Sarah seeing a specialist instead of an emergency room resident at 2 in the morning. It was heat in winter. It was a father not flinching every time his phone rang. The offer was so large it felt like a trap because of course it was one. What do you actually want me to do? He asked. You will drive when Hayes cannot. You will carry medical equipment. You will keep medication with you at all times. You will help me in and out of vehicles when necessary. You will learn how to tighten and release the brace correctly. You will stand close enough in public that if my legs fail, I do not hit the floor in front of cameras. Thomas stared at her, disgust and disbelief fighting in his chest. You want a nurse? No. Nurses appear on payroll. Nurses ask questions. Nurses talk. Then you want a bodyguard. Bodyguards are noticed. Her gaze traveled over his broad shoulders, his scarred hands, his cheap uniform. You know how to be invisible. That is more useful. The insult landed strangely because it was also recognition. Thomas had spent years being unseen by people like her. Now she was saying his invisibility had value. That somehow made it worse. I have a bad knee, he said. You were infantry. I was discharged. After injury, not incompetence. He looked away, jaw tight. I have a daughter. I cannot disappear into your life. For 6 weeks you can. 6 weeks until the logistics merger closes. After that, the board has no leverage. My medical condition becomes an inconvenience instead of a weapon. And if I say no... Evelyn's expression did not change, but the room seemed to grow colder. "Then I hope you are as good at finding work as you are at opening doors." Thomas felt the threat settle around his shoulders. There it was. No raised voice, no villain speech. Just a billionaire reminding him that his survival had always depended on people who could afford to be cruel. He wanted to throw the folder back at her. He wanted to tell her that money did not make her God. He wanted to walk out with his dignity intact. But dignity did not refill inhalers. Dignity did not stop eviction. Dignity did not sit beside Sarah at night and listen to her breathe. "You said full medical," he asked quietly. Evelyn's eyes softened by a fraction, so small he might have imagined it. "Effective immediately. Specialists, yes. Prescriptions, yes. No waiting period, none." Thomas swallowed hard. The answer felt like a hand opening around his throat. "And if I do this, you leave my daughter out of it. You don't use her name. You don't send people to her school. You don't put her in another folder." Evelyn was silent for a moment. Then she nodded once. "Agreed. And you don't speak about her like she's leverage." Something in Evelyn's face tightened. Not anger, something else. "Agreed." Thomas looked at the contract, though the words blurred. "I don't pity you," he said. "Good. Pity is inefficient. And I don't belong to you." Evelyn held his gaze. "For 6 weeks professionally you do." "No," Thomas said, and now his voice steadied in a way that surprised even him. "For 6 weeks I do a job. I keep your secret. I keep you standing. But I am not yours." The silence after that was sharp enough to cut skin. Hayes, somewhere beyond the door, might as well have stopped breathing. Evelyn studied him as if deciding whether defiance made him useless or more valuable. Then, very slowly, she reached for a pen and slid it across the desk. "Fine. Do the job." Thomas picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. In his mind, he saw Sarah running across a park without coughing cheeks pink from cold air, laughing because breath came easy. He signed. The moment his name hit the paper, the life he knew ended quietly. There was no thunder, no music, no dramatic shift in the city outside. Just ink drying on a contract, and Evelyn Croft closing the folder as if she had acquired another asset. "You start now," she said. Thomas looked up. Now Evelyn pressed a button beneath her desk. The office door opened almost immediately, and Hayes stepped in carrying a black garment bag, a phone, and a slim leather case. "Your old uniform goes with Hayes. There is a shower and changing room through the side corridor. The suit has been altered based on your measurements." Thomas stared at the garment bag. "You measured me," Hayes answered without expression. "Your employment medical records included approximate sizing." "Of course they did," Thomas muttered. Evelyn ignored it. "You will be issued a secure phone. You answer it at all times. You do not save my number under my name. You do not discuss your assignment with your manager, your neighbors, your friends, or your daughter. I don't lie to my kid." "Then tell her you got promoted." "Did I?" Evelyn's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "That depends on whether you survive the week." An hour later, Thomas stood in the executive garage wearing a black suit that cost more than everything in his closet combined. It fit better than he expected, but he still felt trapped inside it. The collar scratched his neck. The jacket pulled across his shoulders. His boots had been replaced with polished shoes that felt too soft, too quiet. In the reflection of a black armored SUV, he barely recognized himself. He looked like a man pretending to belong to the people who had always looked through him. Hayes stood beside him explaining protocols in a clipped voice. Which entrance to use, which elevators avoided lobby cameras, where the medication case stayed, which reporters were hostile, which board members were worse. Thomas listened, but part of him remained in his apartment with Sarah's drawing on the fridge. Then the private elevator opened. Evelyn stepped out slowly, dressed in a charcoal coat, sunglasses hiding her eyes despite the underground darkness. Her posture was perfect, but Thomas saw the cost of it now. Every step was controlled, every breath rationed. Hayes moved toward her, but Evelyn lifted one hand, stopping him. Her gaze found Thomas. "Miller, Ms. Croft, open the door." The order was simple, arrogant, familiar. Thomas opened the SUV door. Evelyn moved toward it, and for half a second, just half a second, her hand hovered near the frame as if the distance from standing to sitting were a cliff. No one else noticed. Thomas did. Without thinking, he stepped closer, blocking the security camera with his body, and offered his forearm without looking at her. Evelyn's fingers closed around his sleeve. Her grip was stronger than he expected, desperate beneath the elegance. She lowered herself into the seat without a sound. To anyone watching, it looked like routine. To Thomas, it felt like the first secret they kept together. He shut the door, walked around to the driver's side, and sat behind the wheel. In the mirror, Evelyn's sunglasses reflected nothing. "Where to?" he asked. "The first place where you will learn why I hired you," she said. "Board strategy meeting, 47 minutes away." And Miller. "Yeah, if I fall in that room, your daughter loses her insurance." Thomas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. There was the cruelty again, sharp and practical. But now beneath it he heard something else, fear wearing armor. He started the engine. The SUV rolled out of the garage and into the rain-washed city, carrying a ruthless CEO with a broken body and a desperate father who had just sold 6 weeks of his life to keep his child breathing. Neither of them knew yet that this bargain born from terror and necessity would become the one thing neither money nor power could control. The first week nearly broke them both. Thomas had thought pain made people slower, softer, more careful with the world. But Evelyn Croft moved through pain like a woman trying to outrun a fire no one else could see. She attended meetings with men who smiled at her across polished tables while secretly waiting for her hands to shake. She stood beneath camera flashes with a spine that Thomas knew was screaming. She signed contracts, destroyed objections, swallowed tablets with black coffee, and walked into every room as if the laws of flesh did not apply to her. Thomas stayed 3 steps behind, always near enough to catch her, never close enough to invite questions. He learned the geography of her suffering in silence. The way her fingers curled against her palm meant the brace was cutting into bruised ribs. The slight pause before she sat meant the chair was too low. The almost invisible tightening around her mouth meant she had pushed too far and would pay for it later. At first, she treated him like equipment, and he treated her like a dangerous employer. Their conversations were short, sharp, and mostly unpleasant. "You're driving too slowly, Miller. The street is flooded. The meeting begins in 8 minutes. Then next time buy a company that controls the weather." She would glare at him in the mirror, and he would keep his eyes on the road, pretending not to notice the way her hand trembled against her coat. But something changed in the 3rd week. Not all at once. Not like a door opening, but like ice thinning over dark water. It happened after a dinner with European investors that lasted 4 hours too long. Evelyn had sat at the head of the private dining room in a black gown, laughing at the right moments, slicing through questions with terrifying precision, one hand resting under the table where only Thomas could see it locked around the edge of the chair. By the time they returned to her penthouse, the city below was silver with rain, and the windows reflected a woman who looked flawless from a distance and ruined up close. She made it 3 steps into the foyer before her body gave out. Thomas caught her before she hit the marble. Her weight crashed against him sharp and fragile beneath expensive fabric. "Don't!" she hissed, trying to shove him away with a strength she did not have. "I can stand." "No," Thomas said, and for the first time since she had hired him, his voice left no room for argument. "You can't." She looked up at him, fury and humiliation burning in her eyes, but beneath both was terror. Real terror. The kind Sarah had when she woke in the dark, unable to breathe. That recognition cut through Thomas faster than pity ever could. He did not ask permission. He lifted Evelyn, carefully ignoring the hot burst of pain in his bad knee, and carried her down the hall into a bedroom so large and cold it felt more like a gallery than a place where a person slept. He set her on the edge of the bed, and she doubled forward with a broken gasp, both hands clutching at the brace beneath her dress. "The clasp," she whispered. "It's jammed." Thomas knelt in front of her. There was no elegance left in the moment, no power, no billion-dollar company, no marble tower. There was only a woman shaking with pain, and a man who knew how to help because pain had made him practical. His rough fingers found the metal mechanism under the silk. It had twisted inward, biting into swollen skin. "I have to force it," he said quietly. "It's going to hurt." Evelyn stared down at him, her face stripped bare in a way no boardroom would ever see. Then she nodded once. Thomas braced the canvas with one hand and pulled the lever with the other. The clasp resisted, then snapped loose with a harsh metallic crack. Evelyn made a sound she tried to swallow and failed a small, broken sob that seemed to frighten her more than the pain. Her forehead dropped against Thomas's shoulder. He froze not because she was Evelyn Croft, not because she was rich or beautiful or powerful, but because she had trusted him for 1 second without meaning to. He stayed still. He did not tell her it was all right. It was not. He did not tell her she was strong. She already knew, and it had not saved her. He simply let her breathe against his jacket until the shaking slowed. When he finally eased the brace away and set it on the floor, it landed heavily like armor removed from a soldier too tired to fight. Evelyn sat with her blouse pulled tight around her eyes, fixed on the wall. "Thank you," she said so softly he almost did not hear it. Thomas stood, his knee cracking in the silence. "You're welcome." He turned to leave, but a folded piece of paper had fallen from his pocket and landed near her foot. Evelyn picked it up before he could stop her. It was Sarah's drawing a tall man in blue, a little girl with a green balloon, a yellow sun too large for the corner of the page. Evelyn held it with surprising care. "Your daughter," Thomas reached for it defensively before he could hide it. "Sarah," Evelyn did not let go immediately. Her thumb moved over the crayon lines. "Is the insurance helping?" The question was quiet, almost awkward, as if compassion were a language she understood but rarely spoke aloud. Thomas's chest tightened. "She got the good inhalers on Monday. The ones the clinic kept saying we should try if I could afford them. She hasn't wheezed in 3 days. Evelyn looked at him, then really looked, and what she saw seemed to make something inside her go still. The exhaustion under his eyes, the way his shoulders remained braced even in a quiet room, the shame of a father who had mistaken survival for failure for too many years. "Good," she said. Then, after a pause, "Tell Hayes you are off Sunday." Thomas blinked. "I thought there were no days off." "There aren't." Her mouth tightened, not quite a smile. "I'm making one." "Why?" Evelyn looked back at the drawing. "Because children should remember parks more than pharmacies." Thomas did not know what to say to that. He took the drawing gently from her hand and folded it back into his pocket. At the door, she spoke again. "Miller." He stopped. "When it is just us," she said, her voice tired but steady, "you can call me Evelyn." He nodded once, and though nothing warm or easy passed between them, the air changed. From then on, Thomas no longer saw only the ruthless CEO, and Evelyn no longer saw only the desperate janitor. They saw the broken places the world had taught them to hide. The final test came at the Metropolitan Museum, beneath chandeliers and marble gods, surrounded by donors, reporters, investors, and board members with champagne smiles and butcher's eyes. The merger was 72 hours from closing. If Evelyn survived the night, Apex would be hers beyond challenge. If she failed, Richard Caldwell and the others would tear her apart before sunrise. Thomas stood near a column in a tuxedo that still made him feel like a fraud, watching her cross the room in an emerald gown engineered to conceal the brace. She looked untouchable. That was how Thomas knew she was in trouble. The more perfect Evelyn appeared, the closer she was to collapse. 3 hours passed. Then her left hand drifted toward a cocktail table and gripped the linen so hard her knuckles whitened. Caldwell approached at once, as if he had smelled blood in the air. Thomas moved before thought could slow him down. He cut through the crowd, stepped to Evelyn's side, and placed his body between her and the board member. "Ms. Croft," he said loud enough to interrupt Tokyo operations, "is holding on line 1. They need immediate authorization." Caldwell's smile thinned. Surely Tokyo can wait. Thomas looked him dead in the eye. Not tonight. Evelyn's hand found his sleeve. To everyone else, it looked graceful. Thomas felt the truth. She was falling. He took her weight without changing expression and guided her out of the hall, down a service corridor and into an empty coat room. The second the door locked, Evelyn collapsed against the wall. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered. She slid to the floor, breath tearing out of her, tears cutting through her makeup. "I can't," she whispered. "Thomas, I can't." It was the first time she had used his first name. He knelt in the broken glass, uncaring as it bit through the fabric at his knee, and opened the silver pill case with steady hands. "Yes, you can," he said. "Not because you're invincible, because you're not alone in the room anymore." She stared at him through pain and ruined mascara, and something in her face cracked, not weakness, but the end of pretending. She swallowed the pills, leaned her head back against the wall, and let the silence hold them. Outside, the party roared softly, all money and music and lies. Inside, they sat on the floor among coats and broken glass like two survivors after a storm. "You saved me," Evelyn said. Thomas looked down at his bleeding knee, then at the woman beside him, the billionaire everyone feared, small for once beneath the weight of being human. "I did my job." "No," she whispered. "You saw me drowning and you came anyway." Thomas thought of rent notices, bus windows, Sarah's wheezing breath, Evelyn's bloodshot eyes under the brass lamp, two desperate people staring at each other across a secret neither of them had chosen. "We're both just trying to survive," he said. "Your monsters just wear nicer suits than mine." 72 hours later, the merger closed. Caldwell lost his smile in a boardroom full of signatures. Apex Holdings became untouchable, and so did Evelyn. The official story remained clean strategy, discipline, leadership, victory. No one mentioned the coat room. No one mentioned the brace. No one mentioned the janitor who had stood close enough to keep a queen from falling. 6 months passed. The brace disappeared first. Then the cane she refused to admit she had ever used. Then the gray cast of pain from Evelyn's face. She was still demanding, still impossible, still capable of cutting a room in half with one sentence. Thomas still argued with her, still hated corporate jargon, still kept a spare pair of work boots under his new desk on the 49th floor because some part of him did not trust soft carpet. His title was Director of Executive Logistics, a phrase Evelyn claimed sounded better than the only honest man in the building. Sarah had a real doctor now, real medicine, a bedroom with sunlight, a backpack full of dinosaur stickers. She ran without stopping every 12 steps to cough, and the first time Thomas saw her do it, he turned away so she would not see him cry. On a Friday afternoon, he drove her home in a sensible sedan through a city washed gold by late sunlight. Sarah chattered from the back seat about a triceratops she had drawn at school, her voice bright and breathless only with excitement. Thomas listened, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the folded crayon drawing he still kept in the console. His phone buzzed at a red light. A message from Evelyn appeared on the screen. "Take her for ice cream, corporate card. E." Thomas stared at it, then laughed, a real laugh that surprised him with its ease. "What's funny?" Sarah asked. He looked at her in the mirror. Healthy cheeks, shining eyes, lungs full of ordinary air. "My boss thinks you need ice cream." Sarah gasped, as if this were the greatest executive decision ever made. Thomas turned the car toward the old ice cream shop near the park. The city no longer looked like a machine built to crush him. It looked for the first time in years like a place where light could reach the ground. And somewhere high above that same city, Evelyn Croft stood by a window without a brace, reading a merger report she no longer needed to fear, and for once, she did not feel alone at the top. Sometimes a life does not change because someone rescues you from the darkness. Sometimes it changes because someone sees you there, refuses to look away, and quietly stands beside you until you remember how to step back into the light.